They handed me a key to the smallest, dingiest room and called me a freeloader in front of the whole family, laughing as they claimed the finest suites. What none of them knew was that I owned every inch of that hotel, and the night was young. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Tales Beneath Skin. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the juiciest, most jaw-dropping Reddit drama stories on the internet. We're diving deep into wild family feuds, shocking relationship betrayals, and epic tales of petty revenge. But we don't just leave you hanging with a cliffhanger. We track down every single update, plot twist, and final resolution so you get the complete, satisfying story from start to finish. Grab your popcorn, because we are serving all the tea with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings the chaos to life. Make sure to subscribe to Tales Beneath Skin right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. I had driven 6 hours to get to the Coral Bay Grand, and my hands still smelled faintly of the highway coffee I'd spilled somewhere near the state line. My son Theo was asleep in the passenger seat, 16 and impossibly long-limbed, his head tilted against the window in that way that always made my chest ache with love. I remember thinking, as I pulled into the curving drive lined with palms, that this weekend might finally be different. That maybe, 3 years after burying my husband, the family might treat me like I belonged. I should have known better. I had learned a long time ago that hope is the most expensive thing a person can carry. The lobby of the Coral Bay Grand opened up in front of me like a held breath, marble floors polished to a mirror, a chandelier scattering light across a ceiling painted with a soft coral sky, and behind the front desk, a wall of warm brass that caught the afternoon sun. I stood there for a moment just breathing it in. Most people who walked through those doors saw luxury. I saw something else entirely. I saw the grain of the marble and remembered the exact weight of a floor buffer. I saw the chandelier and thought about how long it takes 2 people to clean every crystal by hand. But my family didn't see any of that. They were already gathered near the concierge desk, a loud knot of people I had spent 15 years trying to please. Bianca stood at the center of them, of course. She always did. She had a clipboard, an actual clipboard, at a 5-star hotel, and she was reading off room assignments in that bright, brittle voice she used when she wanted everyone to know she was in charge. "Roland and I are in the presidential suite," she announced, as though anyone had asked. "The girls are in the 2 Ocean View Junior suites. Aunt Patris, you're in the garden suite, you'll love the balcony." I waited. Theo shuffled up beside me, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and gave a small wave to his cousins, who barely looked up from their phones. I waited for my name. Bianca finally lifted her eyes from the clipboard and found me. Something flickered across her face, a small, private satisfaction that she smoothed over instantly with a smile. "Oh, Delia, there you are." She flipped a page. "We had a bit of a squeeze with the bookings, so we put you and Theo in one of the," she paused, choosing the word like a chocolate from a box, "the economy rooms. Around the back. Number 108. One of her daughters snorted. Roland chuckled into his drink. "It's the least you could do to be grateful, honestly," Bianca went on, her voice dropping into a stage whisper that carried perfectly across the marble. "This whole trip is costing a fortune, and it's not exactly like you're contributing. We can't all be putting people up in penthouses on a maid's pension." The word landed the way she'd meant it to. Maid. A few of them laughed, that easy, unthinking laughter of people who have never once wondered whether they were being cruel. I felt Theo stiffen beside me. He opened his mouth, my sweet boy, ready to defend me, and I put my hand gently on his arm. "Not now, not yet." I looked down at the keycard Bianca had pressed into my palm, room 108, one of the 2 rooms in the entire property that faced the loading dock, with a window that looked out on the dumpster corral and the hum of the compressors. I knew that room. I knew every room in this building. Because in my other pocket, warm from my body heat, was a small brass master key on a worn leather fob, the very first key I was ever handed, At 19 years old, when I walked into my first housekeeping shift with my whole life in front of me and nothing to my name. My thumb found the smooth edge of it now, the way it always did when the world tried to make me small. "Thank you, Bianca," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm. "108 will be just fine." She blinked, surprised I hadn't argued. That was the thing about Bianca, she needed the fight. The fight was how she fed. I took Theo's hand and walked toward the back of the hotel I owned, and I thought, they have no idea whose house they are standing in. Room 108 was exactly as I remembered it. Small, clean, I'd made sure every room in this building was clean, no matter its view, but cramped, with 2 narrow beds and a window that framed the gray flank of the service corridor. Theo dropped his bag on the bed nearest the door and sat down heavily, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The compressor outside droned its familiar note. "Mom," he said finally, "why do you let them talk to you like that?" I sat down across from him. I wanted to tell him everything right then. But some lessons a mother has to teach with her actions, not her words, and I wasn't ready yet. "Because being loud isn't the same as being right," I said. "And because you'll understand more by watching than by me telling you." He didn't look satisfied, but he was 16 and tired, and he let it go. I unpacked slowly, and while I did, my mind drifted back over the last few years the way a tongue keeps finding a sore tooth. It hadn't always been like this. When my husband Daniel was alive, the family kept their contempt on a low simmer, little comments, a certain coolness, the sense that I'd married up and everyone knew it. But Daniel had loved me fiercely and openly, and his love had been a kind of shield. Then he died. And within months, Bianca had appointed herself the emotional center of gravity for the entire clan. She organized the holidays. She managed the group texts. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, she began to organize me out. The invitations that arrived late. The dinners I heard about afterward. The way conversations would trail off when I entered a room, the family closing around her like water around a stone. My phone buzzed. A text from Bianca in the family group thread so everyone could see. Reminder. Big family dinner tomorrow night in the grand dining room, 7 p.m. sharp. Dress code is elegant. Delia, I know it might be a stretch, but please try to look presentable. It's a special occasion and we're taking photos. Smiling face with smiling eyes. That little smiling face. I stared at it for a long moment. Then another text came, this one just to me, private. Also, we should chat this weekend about Daniel's estate paperwork. Roland thinks there are some things that should really be handled by the family properly. You understand. There it was. Under all the theater about rooms and pensions, this was the thing Bianca actually wanted. She had been circling Daniel's estate for 3 years, dropping hints, floating suggestions, always with that phrase, handled by the family properly, as though I were a caretaker of something that belonged to everyone but me. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Outside, the compressor cycled off, and in the sudden quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. I reached into my pocket and drew out the brass key. It was warm and heavy, the leather fob cracked with age, the number long since worn off. My first supervisor, a woman named Estelle who had 30 years on me and hands like sandpaper, had pressed it into my palm on my first day and said something I have never forgotten. "A key isn't power, baby. Knowing which doors it opens, that's power. Learn the building. The building tells the truth even when the people don't." I turned it over in my fingers. I had learned this building. I had learned every building I ever set foot in, and I knew something Bianca did not. The truth was already in the walls around us, waiting. Theo had fallen asleep, one arm flung over his eyes. I pulled the thin blanket up over him and sat by the window in the dark, watching the service corridor where I had once, in another life, pushed a cart just like the ones that rattled past below. And I let myself remember exactly how I had gotten from that corridor to the deed folded in a safe 200 miles away. I was 19 when I started cleaning rooms. Not at the Coral Bay Grand, that came much later, but at a tired roadside motel where the ice machine was always broken and the manager paid in cash on Fridays. I had no family money, no degree, no plan except to work harder than anyone expected a girl like me to work. And I did. I learned which cleaning supplies actually worked and which were a scam. I learned how a hotel breathes, how the laundry flows, how the front desk covers for housekeeping and housekeeping covers for the kitchen, how the whole living organism holds together on the backs of people nobody in the lobby ever bothers to see. I got promoted to floor supervisor, then to operations. I took night classes in accounting with money I saved by eating rice for dinner. When a struggling 12-room inn came up for auction at a price nobody else wanted to touch, I bought it with a loan I had no business qualifying for, and I turned it around in 18 months. Then I bought another. And another. Through a quiet holding company, so that nothing had my name splashed across it, because I had learned early that a woman who looks like she has something is a woman people try to take things from. By the time I met Daniel, I owned 7 small properties and was negotiating for an 8th, a grand old wreck on the coast called the Coral Bay, which I gutted and rebuilt over 2 years into the shining thing his family was now standing in. Daniel knew. Daniel was proud of me, wildly, tenderly proud. But Daniel came from a family who measured worth in inheritance and appearances, and when he brought home a wife who worked in hotels, they made an assumption, and I let them keep it. I let them keep it for 15 years. I let them keep it because their contempt taught me exactly who they were, and there is a strange safety in knowing where you stand. Bianca stood at the head of all of them now. She had married into the family 2 years before I did, and from the beginning she treated the family name like a title she'd earned. Bianca did not have money of her own. Roland's small business limped along, and I had heard, through channels she didn't know I had, that they were quietly drowning in debt. But Bianca had something better than money. She had control. She controlled the narrative. She controlled who was in and who was out. And her long, patient project, the thing she had been building toward for 3 years, was control of what Daniel had left behind. That was her tell, if you knew how to read it. It wasn't the clipboard or the cruelty about the rooms. Those were just her being petty. It was the way she isolated the family from me, one severed thread at a time, so that when the moment came to handle the estate properly, there would be no one left in my corner. It was the way her interest in Daniel's affairs never, ever cooled. And it was the way she was warm to me only when others were watching, and iced the instant they weren't. I had seen it up close 2 months earlier at a cousin's engagement party. Bianca had caught me alone in a hallway and dropped the mask completely. "You know you don't actually belong here, don't you?" she'd said, smiling as though we were sharing a pleasantry. "Daniel felt sorry for you, that's all it ever was. So when the time comes, do the decent thing and don't make it hard." I hadn't answered her then. I just touched the key in my pocket and walked away. But standing at the window of room 108 that night, watching the service corridor of the hotel I had built with my own 2 hands, I understood that the weekend Bianca had so carefully organized was not going to end the way she planned. The building tells the truth, Estelle used to say, even when the people don't. Tomorrow, I decided, the building was going to speak. I did not sleep much that night, but it was not grief that kept me awake. It was arithmetic. For 3 years, I had absorbed Bianca's campaign the way I'd absorbed everything hard in my life, quietly, patiently, waiting for the shape of it to become clear. That night in room 108, the shape finally clarified. I was done waiting. Somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, watching the ceiling, I stopped being a woman who endured and became a woman who planned. The first thing I did, at 6 a.m., was walk down to the front desk before the family stirred. The night manager, a young man named Priya's protege who had no idea who I was, blinked when I asked for Marisol. "Ms. Ockhafer doesn't usually come in until 8, ma'am." "Call her," I said. "Tell her Delia is here, she'll come." Marisol arrived in 20 minutes, still buttoning her blazer, her face breaking into a smile the moment she saw me across the lobby. Marisol had been my general manager for 9 years. Before that, she'd been my front desk lead, and before that, like me, she'd pushed a housekeeping cart. She was the one person in that building who knew exactly who I was, and the one person on the entire property I trusted completely. "You didn't tell me you were coming this weekend," she said, hugging me. Then she pulled back, reading my face the way old friends do. "Delia, what's wrong?" I told her about the room, the freeloader, the maid's pension, the clipboard, about Theo's face, and about the private text. We should chat about Daniel's estate paperwork. Marisol's jaw tightened. They put you in 108, in your own hotel. They don't know it's my hotel, I said. That's the whole point, and I want to keep it that way for now. We sat in her office with the door closed, 2 cups of coffee between us, and I laid out what I needed. Not revenge, exactly. Revenge is loud and expensive, and it never fixes anything. What I needed was the truth, presented so cleanly that it could not be argued with. Because Bianca's power ran entirely on story, and there is only one thing that beats a story, a fact. I need to know what Bianca is actually up to, I said. The estate, Roland's business, all of it. She keeps saying things should be handled by the family properly. I want to know what that means. Here is the thing my family never understood about me. I had spent 20 years learning how to see what people tried to keep hidden. Not through anything shady, through the ordinary, legitimate paper trail that follows every adult through the world if you simply know where to look and have the patience to look there. Business filings are public. Court records are public. Property liens are public. And Marisol, who ran a hotel that hosted lawyers and accountants and business people every single week, knew exactly how to pull a thread. I also had one advantage Bianca could never have anticipated. 3 months earlier, she had asked me, sweetly, in front of everyone, to sign a document she said was just a formality regarding Daniel's estate. I had smiled and said I'd have my attorney look it over first. Bianca's face had done something complicated in that moment, a flash of frustration quickly hidden, and I had filed it away. I still had that document. It was in my bag right now. Pull it out, Marisol said. Let me see. I did, and together, in the quiet of her office, we read it properly for the first time. It was not a formality. Buried in the middle of 3 pages of dense, friendly-sounding language was a clause that would have transferred management authority over Daniel's remaining business interests, including, though it was cleverly disguised, a stake it wrongly claimed the family held in one of my holding entities, to a family trust for which Bianca and Roland were named as sole administrators. Marisol read it twice. Then she looked up at me, pale. Delia, this is a land grab. If you'd signed this, you'd have handed them the keys to your own company. I sat back. My thumb found the brass fob in my pocket, cool now in the early light. Estelle's voice again, from a lifetime ago. Knowing which doors it opens, that's power. Bianca had spent 3 years trying to slip a key out of my pocket. She'd had no idea I'd been counting my keys the whole time. Get me everything on Roland's business, I said quietly. I think I already know what we're going to find. We found it by early afternoon. Roland's business, a home renovation outfit that Bianca described at parties as doing beautifully, was, in fact, a corpse. 2 liens, a lawsuit from a supplier. A pattern of borrowing against borrowing that Marisol, who understood money the way I understood buildings, traced in about an hour. They're not just ambitious, she said, tapping the printout spread across her desk. They're desperate. This, she gestured at the estate document, wasn't about status. They need the money. Soon. Everything clicked into place. The relentless pressure, the isolation campaign, the timing. Bianca hadn't been maneuvering for pride. She'd been maneuvering because she and Roland were sinking, and Daniel's estate, my company, was the only lifeboat she could see. Everything else, the cruelty, the clipboard, the maid's pension jokes, was just the noise she made to keep me too small and too grateful to notice the hand reaching into my pocket. I could have exposed all of it right then. Marched into the presidential suite with the printouts and watched Bianca's face fall. But I didn't. Because a fact dropped in private just becomes a new secret Bianca can spin. I needed to place the truth somewhere it could not be unsaid. Still, I decided to test her. To take one small piece of what I knew and set it down in front of her, gently, and watch what she did. How a person reacts to a single true thing tells you everything about the lie they're protecting. I found her by the pool at 4 o'clock, holding court on a lounger while her daughters photographed cocktails. She saw me coming and arranged her face into its public warmth. Delia, feeling better about your little room? I know it's not much, but beggars, choosers, all that. She laughed lightly for the benefit of the two aunts nearby. I sat down in the chair beside her, uninvited, and kept my voice low and pleasant. I read the paperwork, Bianca. The warmth held for exactly 1 second. The what paperwork? The estate document, the one that was just a formality. I let that sit. I had someone go through it clause by clause, the part about the family trust, the administrators. I looked at her steadily. You and Roland. Here is where I learned everything I needed to know, because a person with nothing to hide would have been confused. A person who had made an honest mistake would have explained. Bianca did neither. Bianca lashed out. You snooped, she hissed, dropping her voice so the aunts couldn't hear, the mask sliding clean off. That was private family business, and you had no right. Daniel would be ashamed of how you're behaving, clinging to money you don't even understand. You were a maid, Delia. You got lucky marrying up, and now you think you get a say. Her eyes were bright and furious. Sign the paper. Do the decent thing before you embarrass yourself in front of everyone. Then, just as fast, the tears came, summoned, theatrical, for the benefit of one of the aunts who had drifted closer. I'm just trying to protect this family, she said, voice wobbling, and she attacks me. I stood up. I felt strangely calm, the way you feel when a storm you've been dreading finally arrives and turns out to be smaller than your fear of it. I understand you perfectly now, Bianca, I said. Thank you. I walked away and my hands were steady, and in my pocket the brass key was warm again, and I thought, tomorrow the building speaks. Bianca did not sleep on it. Desperate people never do. By that evening she had launched her counteroffensive, and it was exactly what I expected. She went to work on the family. By the time Theo came back from the arcade downstairs, he was quiet in a way I didn't like. Cousin Maya says you tried to steal money from the family, he said, not quite looking at me. She says Aunt Bianca's really upset. Is that, Mom, is that true? There it was. The poison moving through the family the way it always did, through Bianca, outward, into the people I loved, even my own son. I sat down next to him. This was the moment I had been protecting him from, and I realized now that protecting him had been a mistake. He didn't need protection. He needed the truth. Theo, I said. I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone in this family. And tomorrow night, you're going to watch the rest of them find out too. Can you trust me until then? He searched my face, and whatever he saw there, I don't know what it was, maybe just the fact that I wasn't afraid, made him nod. Okay, he said, I trust you. That was worth more to me than the entire hotel. That night, Marisol and I finished building the case. Not a case for a courtroom, a case for a dinner table. I called my attorney, David, who had reviewed the estate document 3 months earlier and flagged it as aggressive and possibly fraudulent. He confirmed what we'd found. The document falsely represented that the family held a stake in my holding company. It did not. That stake was mine, outright, and had been since before I married Daniel. Bianca had either been badly misinformed or had deliberately manufactured a claim to property that was never Daniel's to leave. David suspected the latter. If she'd gotten you to sign, David said over the phone, you'd have been signing over authority based on a false claim. That's not just greedy, Delia. Depending on what she knew, that could be fraud. Then came the second confrontation, though Bianca didn't know it was one. At 10 that night, she knocked on the door of room 108. Alone, the mask was on, but it was cracking at the edges. Delia, can we talk, woman to woman? She stepped in without waiting. I may have overreacted at the pool. I'm under a lot of stress. If you just sign the document, all of this goes away. We keep it in the family, no lawyers, no ugliness, for Daniel's sake. I looked at her for a long moment, then I set 2 things down on the little table between us. The first was Roland's lien filing. The second was David's letter, the one that used the word fraud. Bianca went very still. Her eyes moved from one page to the other, and I watched the whole architecture of her composure come down, floor by floor. Where did you? She started. It's all public, Bianca, I said gently. Everything a person does leaves a trail. You of all people should know that. You've been reading mine for 3 years. Her mouth opened, closed. For the first time since I'd known her, Bianca had nothing to say. Tomorrow at dinner, I said, you're going to find out who I actually am. I'd suggest you not make a scene, but that's up to you. She left without another word, and I sat in the dark of the worst room in my own hotel, and I turned the brass key over and over in my hand, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt no dread at all. Only a deep, quiet steadiness, the feeling of a building settling onto a foundation that will hold. The grand dining room of the Coral Bay Grand is the most beautiful room I have ever built. I mean that plainly. When I gutted the old wreck of a hotel, this was the space I saved for last and spent the most on, a long room with tall windows facing the water, hand-plastered ceilings, and a wall of that same warm brass I loved. Because brass reminds me of keys, and keys remind me of everything. At 7 o'clock sharp, my family filed into it in their elegant clothes, exactly as Bianca had commanded. They took the long table set with the good china, and Bianca sat at the head of it, of course, though tonight she sat too straight, and her smile did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Roland kept glancing at her. He knew something had shifted, he just didn't know what. I arrived last with Theo beside me. I had not dressed to impress them. I wore a simple dark dress and in my pocket the brass key. Well, Bianca said, forcing brightness as I sat, now that the guest of honor has finally graced us. A small titter from the daughters, maybe we can order. Delia, the family's been talking, and we really do need to resolve this estate business tonight. As a group, so everyone understands the situation. She wanted an audience. I was happy to give her one. She just didn't understand yet whose audience it was. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the quietest voice in a room is the one everyone leans in to hear. Actually, Bianca, I'm glad you brought that up in front of everyone, I said, because there are a few things this family has never understood, and I think it's time you did. I looked around the table, the aunts, the cousins, Roland, my son. You've spent 15 years believing I was a maid who married up, that Daniel felt sorry for me, that I've been living off this family's goodwill. I paused. I'd like to correct the record. Bianca cut in sharp. Delia, this is neither the time nor. Marisol, I said, without looking away from Bianca, would you join us, please? Marisol had been waiting by the brass wall. She crossed the room in her manager's blazer and stood beside my chair. Every head turned. Everyone, I said, this is Marisol Ackhaffer. She's the general manager of this hotel. She's worked for the same person for 9 years. I let the silence stretch. She works for me. I own the Coral Bay Grand. I have owned it since before I met Daniel. I built it. For a moment, no one moved. Then Bianca laughed, a hard, disbelieving bark. That's absurd. Marisol, tell her. It's true, Mrs. Marshcole, Marisol said, calm as still water. Delia owns this property. She owns 8 others through her holding company. She started as a housekeeper here in this industry, same as I did. I've reported to her for 9 years. A small, fierce pause. Room 108, by the way, she designed it. She designed all of them, including the presidential suite you're staying in tonight, which is booked in her company's name, which means she is your host this weekend. You've been enjoying her hospitality. You could have heard a pin drop onto the marble I chose myself. I set the brass key on the white tablecloth. It looked small there, worn and plain among the crystal. This was the first key I was ever given, I said quietly, to the whole table, but mostly, I think, to Theo. I was 19. I had nothing. A woman named Estelle handed it to me and told me that a key isn't power. Knowing which doors it opens is power. I've carried it every day for 21 years. I looked at Bianca. And you tried to take my keys out of my pocket while telling me I should be grateful for a room. Then I set the documents down beside it. David's letter, the estate paperwork, Roland's liens. One by one, I laid Bianca's entire scheme on the table in front of the family she had spent 3 years turning against me. I did not editorialize. I did not shout. I read the facts plainly and let them speak, because the building always tells the truth, and so does the paper trail. The family listened. And as they listened, I watched their faces change, watched them recalculate 3 years, 15 years, every dinner they weren't told about, every unkind laugh, every time they'd let Bianca speak for them. Aunt Patris put her hand over her mouth. Roland closed his eyes. And Theo, my Theo, turned to Bianca and said, in a clear, steady voice I will remember until the day I die, "You lied about my mom. You made me doubt my own mom." He stood up from the table. "I'm not sitting here." He came around and stood beside me and Marisol. 16 years old, choosing in front of everyone to break free. That was the moment, not the documents, not the reveal. My son standing up. Bianca opened her mouth for one last performance, the tears, the I was only protecting this family, but there was no one left to perform for. The audience she had built for herself was looking at her now with a terrible, clear-eyed quiet, and she saw it. She saw that the story was over. She gathered her clipboard and her purse, and she and Roland walked out of the grand dining room. No one followed them. Bianca's downfall did not arrive as a thunderclap. It arrived the way most real consequences do, quietly, thoroughly, and without any need for me to lift another finger. The estate document went to David, who forwarded it to the appropriate people with a letter noting its false claims. There were no criminal charges in the end. I chose not to pursue them, not out of mercy exactly, but because I had learned long ago that the loudest revenge is rarely the one that lasts. What lasted was this: the family now knew. Every relative Bianca had spent years cultivating had watched her scheme laid bare on a white tablecloth. She could not spin it. She could not organize her way out of it. The group texts went silent. The invitations she used to control stopped mattering, because no one wanted her at the center of anything anymore. She had built her entire power on being the family's storyteller, and in one quiet evening, she had lost her audience forever. That is a kind of exile no court could impose. Roland's business finished collapsing on its own timeline. The Leons saw to that. I heard, months later, that they'd sold their house and moved 2 states away. I felt no triumph about it. When a person builds their life on taking from others, the ending writes itself. As for the rest of the family, some of them called me, awkward and ashamed, in the weeks that followed. Aunt Patris wrote me a long letter that made me cry. I forgave them, mostly. Not because they'd earned it, but because I didn't want to carry the weight anymore. I'd carried enough. The reconciliation I actually cared about happened in the car, 3 days after the dinner, on the long drive home. Theo was quiet for the first hour, and then he said, "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? About the hotels, about all of it." I thought about how to answer honestly. "Because I wanted you to see how people treat you when they think you have nothing," I said. "That's the only time you find out who they really are, and I needed to find out, for your sake as much as mine." He was quiet again. Then he reached over and very gently took the brass key out of the cup holder where I'd set it and turned it over in his hands the way I always did. "Estelle sounds like she was smart," he said. "The smartest person I ever knew. Can I," he hesitated, "when I'm older, can I learn the business, the real way, like you did?" I had to look hard at the road for a moment so he wouldn't see my face. "Yes," I said, "the real way, will start you in housekeeping." He laughed and I laughed, and it was the first easy laughter between us in 3 years. We drove home. And I felt at last the thing I had been quietly working toward my whole life without ever quite naming it. Not wealth, not vindication, though I had both. Peace. The deep, settled peace of a foundation that will hold. The building had told the truth. And so, finally, had I.